Well, it turns out today's digital payment methods are far from perfect. They have fundamental problems that cash doesn't. Turns out today's digital payment methods aren't quite the little goody two-shoes they. For instance, all digital payments have two major failure points: electricity and the internet. Now, if the power goes out, your primary concern might be your inability to scroll on social media while also watching Netflix, but not being able to buy food and water has got to be a close second. When Hurricane Maria hit Puerto Rico,
virtually the entire island has no power, and some areas may not have it restored for months.
When Russia attacked Ukraine,
everywhere there are rolling blackouts. Restaurants are still open, as is this row of retail shops, but for cash only.
When power surges have shut down power in the U.S.
A massive power outage that stretched from New Jersey to Ontario.
All of these crises made digital payments useless and required a temporary reversion to cash. Even if the power doesn't go out, there's still the internet. Not only can it go down, but it also opens the door to breaches and hacks. In 2011, hackers attacked banks in South Korea, and people couldn't use their debit or credit cards for more than a week. In 2021, 800 stores had to close down in Sweden due to a cyber attack that prevented them from accepting payments. Now, using money is something we take for granted as part of the invisible machinery of our lives. But when that access is gone, even for a brief period, it shows just how crucial it is. We need payments to access the necessities of life, things like food, shelter, and medicine. Not being able to pay for those things is effectively losing access to them. And so in the case of emergencies, cash is much more resilient than digital payments. Simply put, cash doesn't crash. Good old cash, my dear friend. The second problem that digital payments have that cash doesn't is that while they are more inclusive for some, they're less inclusive for others. There are groups who are more likely to use cash, like the elderly, and there are groups who just don't have access to digital payments. That includes people with bad credit, some remote populations, and people who can't afford banking fees, as well as houseless people. Not everyone has access to a bank account, and without a bank account, things like credit cards, debit cards, and payment apps are either less accessible or not accessible at all. Globally, 1.4 billion people are unbanked. Cash is something that everyone can use no matter their background. But the third problem digital payments have that cash does not is the most complicated with the most wide-ranging impact. Digital payments Digital payments have middlemen.
Nice.
So let's get into what that means and the major issues middlemen create. When you use cash, there are only two parties involved in the transaction, the buyer and the seller. But when you use a digital form of payment, it introduces a middleman. This middleman processes the transaction. The biggest middlemen are banks and credit card companies, but other digital vendors act as middlemen too, like PayPal, Venmo, or Zelle. And all these middlemen have major problems that cash doesn't have. Middlemen introduce cost. For instance, if you use a debit card, credit card, or any type of other digital payment, merchants pay a fee on every transaction. Merchant processing fees range from 1 to 3% of the purchase. Now, this used to be a trade-off. If you're a business that accepted both cash and these forms of payment, you'd get more customers because there were more people using digital payments and they were faster to use than cash. So you'd be willing to pay the fee to get more business. But increasingly, accepting those payments as a business is simply table stakes. Every customer expects you to do it. That's why in 2022, credit card companies in the US earned $126 billion from merchant processing fees. The necessity of digital payments creates a situation where payment companies can start to raise fees and merchants have little choice but to pay them. And with two companies, Visa and MasterCard, making up 87% of the market share, businesses don't have a lot of options. The only option for many businesses is to raise their prices to make up for the higher fees. And this leads to higher prices for everyone. Ultimately, all these additional costs to small businesses reduce competition. They make it harder for smaller businesses to compete fairly with larger businesses. And as any econ professor will tell you, a lack of competition is bad for the economy. Physical cash does not create these issues. But there is a much bigger problem that comes with middlemen. These companies aren't just neutral people that charge a fee to move money from A to B. They get to see all the transactions that pass through them, and that surveillance gives them an incredible amount of power. Middlemen track your payment history to predict your credit risk. One 2002 study by a Canadian retailer with its own credit card demonstrates this. They found that people who are more likely to miss payments are more likely to use their credit card at a bar, buy generic oil, buy a chrome skull car accessory, or a mega thruster exhaust system. On the other hand, people who basically never miss a payment buy premium birdseed, carbon monoxide filters, and those little felt pads for the bottom of your furniture. But what about someone who uses their credit card to pay for therapy? Or someone who logs in to check their balance at 1 in the morning? Are these signs of distress? Are people in distress more likely to miss payments in the future? When every single payment you make gets tracked, middlemen can analyze it, make predictions about you, and treat you accordingly. But it's not just individuals' access to digital payments these companies control, but entire organizations. And that has some scary implications. Take WikiLeaks as an example. Julian Assange created WikiLeaks, a whistleblowing website that publishes classified documents. The site was mostly run by donations. In 2010, they posted 400,000 classified documents related to the Iraq War, followed by 250,000 US diplomatic cables from American embassies and consulates. Almost immediately, Visa and MasterCard suspended payments to the site, since the documents WikiLeaks published were effectively stolen. MasterCard said the suspension was because their rules prohibit customers from directly or indirectly engaging in or facilitating any action that is illegal. Whether you agree or disagree with their reasoning, this example highlights just how much power financial middlemen have. And this is particularly dangerous when cutting off an institution's finances limits our access to information. WikiLeaks is just one example of this. Middlemen have suspended payments to many independent journalists and news organizations. PayPal has canceled the accounts of both independent left-wing news outlets as well as right-wing news outlets. Freedom of the Press Foundation, a nonprofit that protects, defends, and empowers public interest journalism, had this to say about the threat that financial middlemen represent. Do we want financial services companies loyal only to their investors and with no particular interest in First Amendment freedoms, deciding which publishers should be able to pay the bills? If we can't learn what our leaders are doing because press organizations are being cut off from middlemen, then middlemen present a threat to democracy itself. Middlemen often cite their own company policies, not direct government interference when they cut someone off. While this can be troubling enough, sometimes middlemen do act directly on behalf of governments. All over the world, there have been instances of governments financially cutting off groups they disagree with. It isn't uncommon for the target of financial freezing to be protest groups or political opponents.
A massive protest over frozen bank deposits turned violent in China.
Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau invoking emergency powers. Banks can now freeze their personal accounts, the accounts of anyone linked to the Freedom Convoy.
During the 2019 pro-democracy protests in Hong Kong, protesters used cash instead of payment apps, not because they were worried their accounts would be frozen, but because they were worried they were going to be tracked by the Chinese government. In the US, banks monitoring accounts in an attempt to prevent fraud, terrorism, and money laundering are increasingly cutting off individuals, families, or small business owners who did nothing wrong. Middlemen can be used as a tool that can threaten not only freedom of the press, but freedom of speech. And that is a major problem that cash doesn't have. At the heart of all these issues is the idea that access to money is a fundamental human right. In a world where most of us don't make the things we need ourselves, access to money is our means of securing food, water, shelter, and the other necessities of life. Ensuring that journalists have access to money protects freedom of the press. Ensuring governments can't cut people off from money because of their opinions protects freedom of speech. So if access to money and payments is a basic human right, how do we protect it in a world that is going cashless? The solutions are both technological and legal. From a technological perspective, we need solutions that overcome the current issues with digital payments. Technologies like Zcash offer one solution. Zcash is a cryptocurrency that allows you to send, receive, and hold digital money. Now, of course, this isn't financial advice. We just want to explain this interesting technology to you because, like other cryptocurrencies such as Bitcoin, Zcash uses a decentralized computer network instead of middlemen to process transactions. But unlike other cryptocurrencies, Zcash is more similar to cash because it offers the ability to make transactions privately by encrypting your transaction data. And that's why it's interesting, because it helps avoid the problems of surveillance that other digital forms of payment have. Another example of a technological solution is eCash. Currently being discussed in the US Congress, eCash would be a government-created digital version of cash. If passed, the US government would develop eCash for use on devices such as phones or special payment cards. While it may look similar to payment apps or cards we use today, eCash could be used without needing middlemen and even without an internet connection, making it basically a digital version of cash. However, it will take some time for digital cash solutions like Zcash or eCash to become widely used. In the meantime, we also need legal solutions. For example, we should make sure cash is always available to use. Businesses, especially those selling basic goods like grocery stores, should have to accept it. Banks should have to carry it and make it easily available for withdrawal. Many areas in the US and other countries have mandated that businesses have to accept cash for the reasons we mentioned in this video, although many places do not have such laws. At the moment, cash is the only form of money that makes us resilient to emergencies and is inclusive to everyone. It also protects us from the threats to our economy and democracy that middlemen can bring. This is why it's a problem the world is going cashless, and why we need to make sure we build a future where we and all the generations after us have access to the protections that cash provides. While cash is a vital safeguard in emergencies, inclusive to everyone, and protects our fundamental rights, we really need to create awareness around this issue if we want cash and its digital alternatives to succeed. The mission of our channel, Zcash Media, is to help create this awareness by making educational videos that explore important but complicated topics like this one. So if you found this video valuable, please make sure to share it with others and subscribe to catch our next videos.